Welcome to the Marketplace Midland podcast, where we highlight a monthly speaker that shares helpful tools for all of us to integrate timeless biblical principles into our modern business.
I love to hear the chatter and the community and the fellowship happening. We need this in our lives, don't we, guys? Right? Good men that share values that are going to get in the fight with us, right? Amen? Well, that's who Glenn Harwood is a good man that's going to get in the fight with him. So I've known Glenn for 11-ish, maybe 12 years now. And, you guys can read resumes, you can read the bios. I'll let you do that. I'm not going to patronize you by rereading that. What I want to tell you about Glenn is that Glenn's a warrior, and he's an outstanding man of integrity. And what I mean by that is that he is a whole man. What you see is what you get with Glenn Harwood. Big, gruff, smart, witty, all those things you just have to put up with all the time. You don't get to put him in the pocket. And now he gets to carry a gun around all the time on top of that, so you got to watch your back. Amen? No, I want to tell you guys, so when Lori and I, in 2015, moved to our neighborhood church called Stonegate Fellowship, which was a church plant of First Baptist from a lot of years ago now, the first small group we were in was in the Harwood house. And when I walked into this guy's house and I sat down on his couch after we had dinner and I listened to him crack open the Bible and understand the depth of his doctrinal, not just knowledge, but the wisdom that came along with that, I knew that this is the kind of guy that I wanted to be around. And guys, we're so lucky to have a guy like Glenn serving our community in the manner that he is. Because he could be practicing law somewhere else, ringing the register. You tracking? But he's elected to not to. In fact, his life has been about service. He is a consummate infantryman. Don't let the lawyering fool you. This guy's an infantryman. And he's a leader. And he's an officer. And occasionally he's a gentleman. Some people know him as Big Bear. But I want to introduce you to my friend and brother in Christ and fellow warrior that loves assaulting the kingdom of darkness with justice and truth and grace day after day. Y'all give it up for my buddy, Glenn Harwood.
Good afternoon. How are we doing on volume? I guess you can hear me, right? Look, I want to live a long time, but when I do die, I want to die before Jared so he can speak at my funeral. And I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say there, Jared. Thanks for being here. Thanks for not going to the Chamber of Commerce luncheon or not getting invited to it like I didn't. But I'm glad you're here. I want to just recognize a couple of guys from my office are first-time visitors here, and so thank you guys for coming. Your colleagues, your friends, your public servants, and it's good for the guys in this room to get to see you because they're sacrificing for their community, and I'm grateful for you all. So I brought slides. It's helpful for me to kind of keep me on track. I'm perfectly happy to talk for 15 minutes and answer questions for 20. I'm perfectly happy to talk for 30 minutes. I'd rather do Q&A because I think that way you can tell me what you're interested in talking about. It's a little intimidating, not because it's not a friendly group, but it's hard to strike a balance between saying something that's meaningful without it sounding like, listen to all the things I've done. So I don't want you to take anything I say is look at the things I've done. I'd like for you to take it as a mutual challenge, some things that have challenged my wife and I and our family, and maybe you can talk about challenges you might want to take up. So that's kind of where I want to head today. But the slides are helpful to me, and it gives me something to refer to, and it gives you something to look at besides me. I've got 4 emblems up there, and it kind of will guide the 4 phases of my career. On the top left there, that's the JAG Corps emblem. I spent, a good amount of my career in the Army, and we'll talk about that a little bit. The next one up there is the Western District of Texas U.S. Attorney's Office, and I spent some time of my career there. One of my colleagues from the U.S. Attorney's Office is here. And then the next one is the campaign, and that was kind of an important phase in both my life and what I think is important for the community. So I want to talk about that a little bit. And then the last one is the one I'm most excited to talk about, which is the District Attorney's Office, and sort of how I'm approaching that and some of the things we're doing there. So I will give you some information about, how we operate in the District Attorney's Office, but it's all kind of in the context of the overall theme, which is doing hard things for the sake of the kingdom. And I want to kind of flesh that out, and I want that to be kind of our overall challenge, and the discussion questions kind of lead to that discussion. So these are the things I want to talk about, and so let's get into it. And we're going to do questions afterwards, but I don't think there's a rule that you can't ask a question in the middle. At least it's not a rule for me. How's that? And are you getting all this for the podcast? Okay. So these are the things I want to talk about, and let's hit it, okay? First of all, I want to talk about my testimony a little bit, not because that's a separate thing, because, as Christians, the whole theme of this organization is living out your faith, in the business community or in the community that you're operating in. But I did have a conversion experience, and it was the story of the prodigal son, right? The prodigal son squanders everything that he has in search of hedonism, and he learns his lesson finally and comes crawling back, right? So I'm in that story, but I'm not the prodigal son. I'm Judgy McJudgerson, the older brother that's sitting there with his arms crossed going, I could have told you that was going to happen. And that's kind of the theme of my, growing up. I grew up in the church, and I said a lot of things like, instead of, oh God, save a sinner like me, I said a lot of things like, I told you so. And, it was obvious that was stupid, or, that's what you get. And I actually find myself saying those things to my kids these days as well. But I grew up in the church. My parents were Christians. My dad was a Baptist minister. So I accepted the Lord when I was 5 years old. I was baptized when I was 8 years old in a river in South Texas. You guys know where Rock Springs is and Uvalde? Like halfway between there's a place called Camp Wood and Barksdale. And my dad was the minister at First Baptist Barksdale, population 80, and I was baptized in the Nueces River. And, my life wasn't an adult roller coaster. It was like a kid's roller coaster. So while it's amazing that God saved me, it's not all that interesting testimony-wise compared to some of the amazing, things we've heard in the last couple speakers. But the flip side of that is that kind of makes me accountable for about 50 years worth of being saved, and that weighs heavy on how I'm going to be accountable to how I spend my life. So that's a little bit about where I came from. Let's talk about my family next. I met my wife Kimberly 35 years ago next month. We met in February. We got engaged in April and got married at the end of August in 1991. So that's a little bit thematic of how we've been able to just hit it. I don't spend years and years contemplating the next move. If it's right in front of me, I just say, hey, let's do this. And she has been an amazing partner. Part of the backdrop of all the tough things that we've done and the experiences we've had is we are polar opposites. And those of you that know Kimberly know that about her. So anything that I'm like, hey, let's dive in head first, imagine the opposite personality having to go along for that ride. And that's been her. So she's amazing. Let's see. I got 4 kids that we had the old-fashioned way, and I'll go through my family here. And then we added 2 through foster care and adoption, and I want to talk about that a little bit as well. My oldest, TJ, and his wife there have 2 of my grandbabies, and she's got another baby due. And then number 2 is my daughter, Hannah, and her husband, Connor, he's a petroleum engineer, and he designs drill bits. So he's kind of closer to you guys than I am. He works at Reed Heikelog. And she's got a foster baby there, but she's fixing to adopt her. And since that picture, she had another grandson for me. And then number 3 is over here, and she just recently got married, and she lives in Dallas. She works at Dallas Baptist. And then number 4 is got the cheesy mustache up there, and that's his fiance. They got married this summer, and he's at Tech. So he's at law school at Tech in his first year, and my older son is at his 3rd year of law school. So they're the only 2 law school students in Texas I can't recruit because I'm not allowed to hire them, but they're up there and we get to see them quite a bit, so that's nice. And then number 4, Davey came to live with us. Let me just talk about foster care a little bit. In about 2006, we lived in Fort Hood, Texas, and that's when we were in the thick of it with our 4 young kids, and they were, kind of about ages 3 to 10, and we sort of were a little bit interested in foster care. But being in the military at the time, and we'll talk about that, it's just impractical. You can't do foster care when you're in the military because you're moving next month or whatever. There were 3 summers in a row that we moved, bam, 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 3 summers in a row. So you can't get into the cycle. You can't really practically get approved, but it was back there. It was something that we thought about. So in 2015, I retired from the Army, and I was in my later 40s, and my wife and I just kind of, we heard about it again, and we heard about a need, and we thought, well, let's go to this meeting. What's the worst that can happen? And so we went to this meeting, and then for about the next 18 months, we went through the process to get licensed to foster. And she always thought about fostering, and I think I was probably a little bit more realistic because I knew a lot of times when you foster, they don't leave, and you end up, at a decision point. But we went through the process, and we got licensed on a Tuesday, and on a Thursday, the caseworker called us in 2018 and said, hey, I found a kid for you. And so we went to High Sky, and we met Davey, and he was 5 years old at the time. And he was with us for a number of months. Then he went to, some family for a number of months, and then he came back. And about 1.5 years later, we were kind of at the point where his family rights were all terminated. And so he literally, was an orphan. And, we were at a crossroads. And if you've seen the movie Elf, there's that one scene where Buddy the Elf leaves the North Pole, and the Norwal and someone else are there, and they're like, good luck, buddy, I hope you find your dad. And we were at the crossroads where we could either say, well, we're going to do something amazing and crazy, or else we're going to look at a 5-year-old and say, good luck, I hope you find a dad. And we said, what's the worst that can happen? And so we did it, and we adopted him. So in 2019, we adopted Davey, and in the midst of that, we had agreed to foster, so these kids are kind of coming through our house. And one day, Bella shows up, and she was 21 months old at the time. And we had her for about 6 months. And then we went through kind of a rigmarole with CPS. And CPS, God love them. There's a bunch of people that want to do good things, but the system is almost fatally flawed because we live in a broken world, and there's a lot of bad things going on. And sometimes, you just make the best out of all the worst options. And so we struggled for a few months. We ended up going to court and getting Bella back, and she's been with us since 2020 again. So she lived with us for another couple of years, and we ended up adopting her in 2022. So these kids I've got are ages 9 up to 29, and so it makes an interesting life for us. There were 3 days in a row in 2021 where my granddaughter was born, I had cataract surgery, and then I went to meet the teacher at preschool. And so sometimes I feel like a young granddad, and sometimes I feel like an old dad. So Bella was born when I was 47 years old. So I don't know, does anybody have a kid that came along when they were about that age? So it's pretty old. And And I'm not going to say how old my wife is, but I will tell you she's a year older than me. And so it's not rational. We are not the right people to do this, but we did it. We're doing our best, and it's our number one mission field. Our life took a very different turn. While our friends were saying goodbye to their kids at college and starting kind of those years, we were going to kids' soccer games again. Not because they're our grandkids, where you can kind of sneak in and then sneak out. It's like, we're in the grind of it. And I will say this, it's not actually that hard for me, because I was going to work through my 50s anyway, right? It wasn't like I was going to sit at home. So I still go to work every day, just like I would have if I didn't have kids at home. It's very, very different life for my wife, who's a stay-at-home mom. She, she doesn't have any contemporaries that are 50-something years old that have a 9-year-old daughter. So it's been a huge sacrifice for her, but she views it as service. We weren't looking for any extra kids. We had plenty of kids, and we weren't looking for the difficulties of dealing with the system. But that's where we found ourselves, and so that's what we did. And some of you have walked with us. I remember I texted Will Carroll's wife the night Bella showed up, and I said, "Hey, Kelly, we just had a 21-month-old girl dropped off at our house. Can you help us with anything?" And she showed up the next morning. I don't know if you know this, but she showed up the next morning with a truck or a Suburban or something, and it was half full of diapers, clothes, and toys the next day. So we didn't buy Bella any clothes for a year, because apparently Will's mom likes to shop and she buys extras. And so we had a community of support, and it's changed the trajectory of what our life looked like. But it has been a blessing, but it's also, it's difficult. It takes me about 3 times as long to get off the ground as when I had my first set of kids. So it's tough. But that's our family. That's kind of where we're at now. Don't take the frowny face as her being in a sour disposition. That's just a picture face, right? She's wonderful, and Davey's wonderful. When I was shortly out of college, I was kind of bouncing around, and I worked a couple different odd jobs. It was in 1991. There was a recession. I wasn't nearly as marketable as I thought I would be with a math degree. And I eventually thought, hey, I think I want to be an officer in the Army. So I put in a packet to the Army, and then I got a job with IBM. So my wife and I moved to North Carolina to work at IBM at their headquarters there in Research Triangle Park. I don't know if anyone knows that area. It's a beautiful area. And I had been there for about 3 weeks, and the Army called and said, "Hey, we've accepted you. You can go to basic training." And my wife kind of thought I was joking when I said, "Hey, we're going to leave Cary, North Carolina, and I think I'm going to go make $800 a month in the Army." And so she said, "Oh, isn't that funny? They should have done that before you started at IBM." I said, "Well, hold on." And that was 2 years into marriage, and I think that's when she got the idea this was going to be a non-traditional kind of thing. She grew up in the same house. She came home from the hospital, and her parents put her in a bedroom, and she left that bedroom to go off to college. I went to 10 different schools growing up because my dad was in the Navy. So I was much more wired for bouncing around. The 6 years I've lived in my house in Grassland is the longest I've ever lived at any one address my entire life. So we come from very different backgrounds. So it wasn't a big deal for me to often join the Army. My dad had been in the Navy, but it was a big deal for her. So that was a huge sacrifice. But I did join the Army. I went to officer candidate school after I went to basic training. I was in the infantry for a few years, and then the Army offered me a chance to go to law school. And they paid for it. So I signed on the dotted line. And, I always kind of viewed my officer assignments guy, because he's the guy that tells you where you're going next. I just figured the Lord speaks through him, because whatever he says, that's what I'm going to do anyway, because you don't really have a choice. You don't get to just quit whenever you want to. So I signed on to be committed to the Army for an additional few years, went to law school. These are some of the places these are all the places that we were assigned. We had some assignments that we were excited for, and we had some assignments that my wife did a pretty good job of holding back the tears in front of the kids. Even the places where she was holding back the tears in front of the kids, she would usually cry when we left, because while we were there, we tried to plug in, make relationships, So it's kind of been a pattern in our life. We move somewhere and she cries or starts to cry, and then she makes the best of it. I'm not going to say whether she cried when we moved to Midland or not. No one told me fly him in at night. I didn't know that trick. So we drove in the full broad daylight. And I will, if you haven't done it in a while, look at that drive between Garden City and Midland with a fresh set of eyes. And, you need to tell a brother, take I-20 instead. But it's been wonderful. So these are the places we were. I've lived in Texas longer than any other state. I was here as a kid for a few years. I was assigned here at Fort Hood for a few years, and now I've been here for almost 11 years. So Texas is not only my home, and Midland is my home, but I also don't have another home. It's not like I can leave Midland and go somewhere else. I don't have anywhere else. So this is my home. We've tried to make the best of it, and this is where we're at. But we came here in 2015 because when I retired out of the Army, I wanted to be a federal prosecutor. If you don't know, in my mind, at the time, and I still think there's some truth to this, that's kind of the pinnacle of your career as a line prosecutor. Now, not for you guys. The pinnacle of your career is working in my office. But for other people, being a federal prosecutor you might think that that's the pinnacle of because it's kind of cool. So I want to talk about that for a few minutes. Oh, these are some of the places I deployed to. I was in Macedonia for 6 months. I went to war in 2003 during the first cycle. I went again to Iraq in 2006 and 2007. I was in Afghanistan. I also spent a lot of time in Africa. By the way, one of the guys back there is Dave McCracken. He's a friend of mine from 20 years ago. We worked together in the Army, and he's in Midland serving you now based on a connection we had from a long time ago. So I'm grateful for him and his friendship and his service to the country as well. Kind of the stuff that Army lawyers do is that kind of stuff. I spent a lot of time in criminal law, prosecuting and defending. If you're a military prosecutor, it's virtually identical to being a federal prosecutor. So the transition when I came to Midland to be a federal prosecutor was pretty seamless. They use the same rules of evidence. You wouldn't know the difference. So working at the U.S. Attorney's Office was a career goal, and I loved it, and I did it for 6 years. These are some of the kind of cases that we worked. We worked, a lot of violent crimes in Midland. Now, there's some U.S. Attorney's offices that do it differently. There's 94 U.S. Attorney's offices in the country. There's 4 districts in Texas, north, south, east, and west. Some states only have 1 district, but there's 94 throughout the country. You work for a U.S. attorney, who's the top federal law enforcement officer in the county, or in the district. The Western District, by the way, includes offices in Waco, San Antonio, Austin, Del Rio, El Paso, Alpine and Pecos, and Midland. So that's the Western District. It's the largest geographic district in the continental United States. But we worked a lot of violent crimes, a lot of drugs, a lot of guns, obviously immigration, and we did white collar, and then child exploitation. So those are the kind of cases we worked. And so there's a lot of overlap between what I do as a district attorney and the kind of crimes that I did as a federal prosecutor here. Now, some places, they only do like exciting white collar cases that are worth billions of dollars. But in Midland, we were a smash mouth prosecutor's office. We took down violent criminals, and we had a great time. And I worked with Shane there for 3 years. And so that's what we did. I loved it. I would have never left it, except that I was involved in the law enforcement community, and I was well aware that there was a problem in the community, and I felt uniquely situated to do something about it. And so I moved to the next phase. Federal employees aren't allowed to campaign. They're not allowed to raise money. They're not allowed to be overtly political. You're allowed to vote, and you can do things in your own yard, basically. But there's a lot of restrictions. So when I decided that I needed to run for district attorney, I had to quit my job. And that was also an interesting conversation with my wife. You know, I don't have what they call a lick in the oil field where I could kind of, you know, ride off of that. So it was a step of faith, but I felt like it needed to happen. So in Texas, the people who can credibly run for district attorney all work for the district attorney. So that's a little problematic. I just happen to be a federal prosecutor, but not many people are willing to quit their job as a federal prosecutor on the chance that they can take out a 2-term incumbent. But I felt like it was important. I felt like I needed to do it. And I'm not going to rehash all the reasons why that is. But the Lord blessed that time. And so I'm a candidate. And I didn't know anything about being a candidate. But, you know, I took a step of faith. I found some mentors. And at the same time I was thinking that needed to happen, there were some people that came to me and said, hey, we're thinking this needs to happen. And so we kind of met up and people were supportive. I initially was just going to take a chunk of money out of my savings account and just kind of go for it. And someone came to my wife and she said, oh, honey, people will give you money. And that's actually true. And I will tell you today, I don't have to ask for any money from any of y'all. And it's campaign season and it's fun to watch, but it is not my cycle. And so I just sit back and eat popcorn and watch everybody else go after it. I'm hoping that we're serving the community well in this office. And in 2 years, when it is my time, that nobody wants to mess with it. And we just get to keep doing what we're doing without another campaign. It's honestly, it's not pleasant campaigning. I love talking about the office and my vision for the office, but asking people for money and there's no delicate and gentlemanly way of saying this person has the job and they're lousy at it and vote for me without that sounding personal. And so it's unpleasant because I don't like that. I don't like that that you have to, you know, attack someone else's performance, particularly if you're taking on an incumbent. So I'm hoping that I don't have to, you know, I'll fight for it, don't get me wrong, if I need to. But my hope is that we just get to continue to serve and I don't have to be a candidate that asks for money and things like that. But I was elected in March of 2024. And then I had challenges. When I swore in, this was the passage I talked about. And I'm actually going to read it, if you don't mind. Romans 13, 1-4, let everyone submit to the governing authorities, since there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are instituted by God. So then the one who resists authority is opposing God's command, and those who oppose it will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Do you want to be unafraid of the one in authority? Do what is good, and you will have its approval. For it is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, because it does not carry the sword for no reason. For it is God's servant, an avenger that brings wrath on the one who does wrong. And that's government service, particularly the military, and more specifically in Midland County. You know, my office, the sheriff's office, the police department, we carry the sword of the government. So these are my takeaways, and this is what I talked about. Number one, God instituted the justice system. And with all due respect to the founders of Texas and to the founders of the United States, God instituted justice systems thousands of years ago. And this is just, you know, the modern day version of the justice system. It's his justice system when it's exercised properly with discernment, and it's his justice system when it's abused and misused. But make no mistake that God wants us to have a justice system. It's the Lord's servant for good. This is a guiding principle. And what I told the people that were going to work for me is, I am serving the Lord by doing this job. And whether you like it or not, you are serving the Lord by doing this job because of how we're going to perform our work. And so this is truly, I believe, biblical servant service to the community. And then number three, this is important in Midland based on some experiences that we had. If you're minding your own business and following the law, you have nothing to fear. But the flip side is, if you're doing wrong, you should be afraid. I have some talented prosecutors that are ready to do their best to hold you accountable. So this is kind of the guiding principle. There's a couple other passages in Proverbs that are wonderful. In our American justice system, we often say, oh, it's better that, a guilty man go free or 100 guilty men go free than one person be wrongly convicted. And while that's true, it's very clear biblically that God doesn't want anybody to go free who's guilty, and he doesn't want anybody to be convicted who's innocent. And I think the biggest, most important thing I do in Midland is make sure we're not running people through the ringer who don't belong in our system. There's plenty of people that will chase after bad guys, but it is a key job of mine to make sure that we're using our justice system in the right context and only prosecuting people who deserve to be prosecuted. Now, we go to trial sometimes and we lose sometimes. And if people come out of trial and they say, wow, that was a tough one, then I can live with that if we lose. But if people come out of trial and say, I don't know why this guy was on trial, then that means we haven't done our job. So that's kind of how I approach the office. So let me talk about the office a little bit. This is what our org chart is. I keep checking my phone, not for messages, but for time. I want to make sure that I leave time right. So this is what our office looks like. When we started, I had 25 attorneys budgeted. I had 15 attorneys. Within 6 weeks, I was down to 9 attorneys. So personnel was the biggest thing. When I met with the office after I won the election, I said, look, I got to build a team of 55 people, and I don't even have a secretary. So it was an opportunity to kind of let the people know that I wanted them to be on my team. It had been 1985 since an outsider took over the Midland County DA's office. Al Shorey was the last person who didn't work in the office that won an election and took over. It was extremely traumatic for the people in that office. Everybody, of course, I had been campaigning against some of the people that worked in that office. And so they didn't have much good to say about me, even though they didn't know me that well. And so there was a lot of fear and a lot of trepidation about what was going to happen on January 1st of last year when I took over. But this is what the office looks like today. For reference, every name that's highlighted, and by the way, that includes these people down here, every name that's highlighted is somebody that I brought on since January 1st. And the Lord has blessed our recruiting efforts. People literally have walked in the front door and said, hey, I've got a law degree, I want a job. I may have poached a few people from other places. And I'll tell you what, I go to them and I say, hey, how'd you like a pay cut? You'd like to serve your community. And they're like, yeah, I'll do it. And so, there's some people that took substantial pay cuts to come and work for me. And I'm grateful for them because that's the one thing I can't really control. Public service is a financial sacrifice, particularly for people who have law degrees and have the ability to do just about anything, but they choose to spend the good years of their career serving this community, and I'm grateful for them. So this is our team. Just for context, I've got a chief investigator, I've got a chief administrative officer, I have 2 division chiefs that run 2 of the trial courts. The felonies happen in these 2 district courts. So each of my division chiefs have 2 district courts. I have a whole bunch of misdemeanors and misdemeanor prosecutors, and then another division chief that kind of runs all the rest of the office. I have a wonderful leadership team, and I've really tried to build a culture in the office that values service and respect, and a respect for the citizens of Midland, and a desire to do right by the citizens of Midland. A little bit about the cases. This is how many pending cases we have. The little green sliver is juvenile cases. I've got our most longest tenured prosecutor is our juvenile prosecutor. And then I have almost 2,000 felonies that are pending, and I have 3,300 misdemeanors. So just in case you don't know, a misdemeanor is a crime that is 1 year or less in jail as a possible sentence. A felony is anything that's more than a year. And then juvenile is, it could be murder, or it could be, truancy. So juvenile crimes, run the gamut. So those are the pending cases. I think I had about 8,000 cases when I started. So in the calendar year 2025, this is how many new cases came in the door. These cases come from the sheriff's office, they come from the police department, they come from MISD police, they come from the hospital police, they come from Greenwood police, they come from DPS, sometimes they come from the FBI or DEA or HSI. So any law enforcement agency that encounters a criminal case in Midland County can bring it to us for prosecution. And these are the number of cases that they brought us. For a frame of reference, we have 4 misdemeanor trials scheduled for this week. We had 4 scheduled for last week. If we did that every single week, we would not be able to do anything else, and we'd only be able to get through 200 misdemeanors a year. So as you can see, with 3,400 misdemeanors coming in, the vast majority of our felonies and misdemeanors are either dismissed or disposed of through plea bargaining. I would need an office 10 times the size of my office if we had to try every case. It's very unsatisfying because if you plead a case out, that means you're selling it for less than what you think it's worth, right? And of course, the defense attorney is getting less than maybe what he would have gotten. So it's a very unsatisfying resolution, but it's just a necessary part of our system. Those are the new cases that came in, and we moved 8,500 cases. Sometimes we just dismissed them. One of the first things I did is I dismissed 1,000 misdemeanors that were more than 4 years old, which means the entire term of my predecessor for the last term, they didn't even touch these misdemeanors. And you can't do good work going forward if you're constantly trying to clean up messes from years ago. So at a certain point, we had to cut some losses, which is also unsatisfying, so that we could get to a point where we could function as an office. And again, I was down to 9 prosecutors. So for a good number of months, we were way understaffed, way understaffed. I've hired 18 attorneys since then. The math doesn't work out just right because I've had 1 or 2 people leave, some people get transferred and things like that. But we're basically fully staffed. The other thing that I'm really proud of that we're doing a little bit differently is we've also built a pipeline. So I already have 4 law students that are graduating in May that have already signed on to come work for me. And I have 7 law students that are in the previous year of law school that are coming to work for us this summer. And I've got a few, and I'm getting some more that are just finishing their first semester of law school now that have come to work for us. And so we're doing a really good job of recruiting. And I even have 2 ladies in my office that are going to law school next summer. So I already know my first 2 hires of 2029. So we're building a pipeline of people who are willing to come to Midland, or they're from Midland, and we're just kind of growing them from the ground up. I've got a good cadre of mid-career prosecutors, a wonderful cadre of senior, experienced 25-year prosecutors, and so we're just building the rest from the ground up. So when you walk into our office, you'll see a lot of young faces. They barely shave. They're a totally different generation than me, but it's wonderful to see, and they're serving their community, and that's what we're doing. Misdemeanors. This is the 3,400. These are the most common misdemeanors that happen in Midland County, and this shouldn't surprise, the sheriff could have told you this. DWIs is by far number 1. If it were up to me, everybody that got a DWI would go to jail for 30 days, first time, but that's not what happens. They plead out. They're just dangerous. They're inherently dangerous. It's only by chance that you don't kill somebody. So we go after them. We hold people accountable, and about half the trials we do in our misdemeanor are people who got DWIs who have decided they either don't want to plead guilty or they've got some, aversion to it. But we're trying to hold them accountable. Different kind of drug offenses are next, and the numbers are down here. That's 400, 500, 600, 700. So we get almost 800 misdemeanor level DWIs. And there's several ways you'll see you can actually get felony DWIs. If it's your 3rd one, you can get a felony DWI if you have a child in the car. Those kind of things can make DWIs a felony as well. Next is assault family violence. Very, very common to have domestic disputes, and we deal with those. And usually, when it happens, everybody wants the guy to get arrested. But 4 months later, when my office is dealing with it, they're all back together and everything's happy. So it just makes it very difficult for our office to prosecute those. Criminal trespass, theft, driving while license is invalid, resisting, evading, reckless driving, racing, and assault. By the way, racing, I didn't know this, but if law enforcement, if the sheriff catches you guys racing, they can take your car. And so I've got some cases where we seize your car. If you're racing on our roads, we can seize your car and go to court and get that. Yes, Davis?
How much of criminal trespass is vagrants and bums?
Probably a large percentage of it. It's a large percentage of that. Davis's dad is one of the judges we see very frequently. As much of a piece of work as Davis is, we know where he gets it. He comes by it honestly. But Judge Morris is the longest tenured employee in Midland County, and he's retiring next year. But he's one of the judges we practice in front of. Okay, so these are the most common felonies. By far, narcotics, hundreds and hundreds of them. Aggravated assault, felony assault, family violence, by the way, which is, a domestic dispute that goes the next level. If it causes some sort of serious injury, if there's choking, something like that. Theft, evading, felony DWIs, failing to register as a sex offender, stealing a car, fraud, injury to a child or an elderly, burglary, assault of a public servant, various weapons charges, stalking, harassment, prostitution, forgery, tampering with evidence, sexual assault of a child, child endangerment, and criminal mischief. Those are the 20 most common felonies that came into our door last year. And this gives you an idea. Some of these don't make the list, but these are violent felonies. So aggravated assault, felony assault, family violence. And then down, we had 10 murders come in the door last year. There probably were more murders than that, but some of them are still under investigation. Probably 17 robberies, 2 kidnappings, one terrorism. So these are some of the violent felonies we have. So that's a little bit about the office. And let me bring it back to our theme. This is the challenge. When you face an opportunity to do something difficult that needs to be done with some general biblical obligation to do it, and you don't really want to do it, how do you decide whether or not to do it? And again, I'm not talking about things that you want to do. If you want to do something, well, that's not a cross, right? That's just something you want to do. I'm talking about the things that you actually don't want to do, but you're faced with it. I've got Matthew 16:24 up there. If you want to follow Jesus, you have to deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. My wife has done that more than I have. But together, we've chosen to do some things that we didn't want to do, that we thought, we were called to do. And here's what I think a lot of people do, and here's my challenge for you. A lot of people, when they're faced a challenge, they say, well, I'll pray about it, and if God tells me to do it, then I'll do it. And here's my challenge to you. Flip the script. If you're faced with a challenge that you don't want to do, that you feel like, maybe God calls you to do, then say this: I'm going to do it, and I'll pray about it, and if God tells me not to do it, then I won't do it. Because if you believe in prayer, then God can tell you not to do it the same way he could tell you to do it, right? So, if you're waiting for an audible voice, but God's already written it down in the Bible, like visiting a prisoner, like caring for an orphan or a widow, or feeding the hungry, or whatever some of the modern day equivalents of service are, you've already been told to do it. So it's just a matter of, how you're going to spend your energy and how you're going to spend your time. So I would just challenge you, think of it the other way around. Just say, I'm going to try this. I'm going to try it and we'll see what happens. And if God doesn't want me to do it, then he'll tell me. So those are the things I wanted to share with you. But I also want to be available to answer questions for anything that you'd like to talk about. Do you want to do questions now, Jared? How do we do this?
Yeah.
Well, let's do it.
Hey, Glenn,
Sir.
who deals with illegal residents around here? Or do we do that?
Well, we do. The way it works in good communities, and we have a good community, is when somebody's arrested for anything, public intoxication, drunk driving, assault, family violence, and they're down at the sheriff's office, they screen them whether they're illegal or not. And the sheriff's guys, let ICE, enforcement removal operations. He gives them access, and if they're illegal, then they put what's called a detainer on them. And whenever their case is resolved, then they hand them over to ICE. And that's why you don't see these big raids in places like Midland, because in Texas, law enforcement is required to cooperate with enforcement. So the answer is the feds do it, but they do it with the cooperation of the folks at the jail and the sheriff's office. And that's how it's supposed to work. There is a state law that's been passed, and it's under judicial review, that actually makes it a state crime. Some of the immigration laws are both a federal crime and a state crime, but again, that's under review, so we're not enforcing that right now. But it's a federal problem that's best dealt with in cooperation with local authorities, and we do that very well. And sometimes, by the way, if somebody's illegal and they're going to get deported, and all they're looking at for me is probation or something like that, we'll just dismiss the case and let them go get deported, rather than keep them around and house them. It costs the sheriff $106 a day to house somebody at his jail, and so rather than somebody stick around for 6 months waiting for some low level of punishment, well, I'd rather them just head on their way, and that's kind of how I do that. What else?
Thank you for the information and everything you said in there. And then also thank you for your service and the people that work with you in the office for serving the community of Midland. My question is about the challenge of the adoption. You adopt a child, that's a big challenge. Does that lay under that you have the challenge first and then you wanted to do it, or you didn't want to do the challenge and then you prayed for it, and then you heard the Lord, voice inside you telling you to go for it?
Well, it's kind of a combination of all those things. First of all, I heard the voice in James that said, pure religion is this, caring for the widows and orphans. So, I didn't have to search too hard for that, and that's the backdrop. I guess the point is, in our family, I meet a lot of people that want to foster and adopt because they want to build their own family, and that's wonderful. It's hard, but it's wonderful. We weren't looking for that, and I don't ever want my kids to think we didn't want them, but that's our goal, was not to build our family. We were literally pushing 50 years old, and our kids were, just about out the door. So we weren't looking to take on potty training in our late 50s. But the challenge, was in front of us, and we decided to say yes. If anyone else had done it, I wouldn't have had to say yes. But in our situation, at that day and time, that was put in front of us, and so that's what we said yes. And a lot of people, adoption is beautiful, but it's important to remember adoption represents, and that's the imagery that the Bible uses, particularly in the New Testament, with our relationship with Christ, right? Jared's adopted, he knows this. But here's what you have to remember about adoption. It's not sunshine and unicorns. Adoption only comes after death. Our daughter's mother died. Now, she was in the system, but she actually died. So the only way anybody gets adopted is if they're abandoned, or a court terminates their parental rights, or if their parent dies. There is a death of a relationship on the other side of the adoption coin. And it's important to remember. So it comes with a lot of baggage and a lot of pain, but it's beautiful. It's not easy, but it's beautiful. So, that's why we weren't looking for that. Like my daughter, for example, they've got a little baby. They've had her since she was 6 weeks old, and they're going to get to adopt her. But they've had to give a lot of kids back that they've fostered. And so it's a painful process, and they're able to have kids. They had another grandson, but they chose to do it to serve as well. So it can be a beautiful thing, but it's not easy. And it requires a death. Just like our life, you have to die to the old life before you get adopted. What else? Yes, sir. Bergman, right? Matt and I served in the nursery together for 7 wonderful long years. We watched our wives change thousands of diapers, and it was hard. They're wonderful.
With all you've seen and experienced across the globe, the problems, the challenges you see in Midland and in your family environment. What does your prayer life look like today, standing here with everything you've seen, where you think the world's going? I don't want you to predict that, but what does your prayer life look like, and how are you encouraging your family?
I'm a whole lot better parent at 56 than I was at 36. I try to be much more intentional, and breakfast is our sacred time. A lot of competing events at night, but I get up every morning and make my kids breakfast. Wednesday morning I don't get to because I'm at men's Bible study, but we go through the Bible chunks at a time with Davy and Bella, and we pray that God would remind us how He loves us, so that we could show kids in school how much He loves them. I'm able to pray with people in my office occasionally. Tragedy befalls people, and when they're under your care and under your supervision, that's a wonderful opportunity to remind them how much God loves them. I prayed. I have naturally a healthy ego, so my biggest prayer was for humility. One of the guiding passages I didn't put on there was Micah 6:8. He's shown thee, O man, what is good and what the Lord requires of thee, but to do justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly. And the last part is a hard one, so I pray for humility. Because my office, not just me personally, but my office is an extremely sharp sword, and we have to exercise that authority with discernment and judgment, and it's difficult. I spend a lot of time disappointing people. I'm disappointing law enforcement because I'm not taking their case. I'm disappointing a victim because they're not happy with how we're handling the case. I'm disappointing a defense attorney because they think that I'm not listening. I'm disappointing a judge. So I manage a lot of disappointment, and it takes judgment and humility to manage disappointment in a way that doesn't alienate everybody all the time. I give everybody a turn, but I try not to alienate them all at one time.
Thanks for your service, by the way. So how do you balance the act of extending grace and enforcing the law?
Well, there's a couple things. The question was, how do you balance grace with enforcing the law? I don't have this slide up, but I have other slides. One of my slides shows that of felony convictions, only about a third of them end up going to any kind of confinement. Most people get either probation or deferred probation. If you walk into our office and commit a nonviolent offense, you just made an off decision, the odds are you're not going to prison. So we have a lot of tools under the law, and we have prosecutorial discretion to handle cases in a way that reflects the severity of the offense. It reflects, most importantly, the criminal history of the defendant, right? If I've got somebody who's got this criminal history and somebody who's got this criminal history, they're not treated the same. I don't have to treat two different defendants the same. That's kind of a misunderstanding. Justice requires that we treat everybody, based on a totality of the circumstances, and that it's a judgment call. But the grace and mercy come from the Lord, and forgiveness comes from the Lord. My job is to exercise with discernment and execute the laws in the way that I think most reflects the values of the community, and there is plenty of room for rehabilitation and lesser forms of punishment than just sending people off to prison. So it's a difficult dance. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Well, I'm going to close this. Wayne, thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Marketplace Midland podcast. Please join us next month with Speaker Chaz Perry.